All right, so good morning, everybody. Before we get started here, I just want to pay tribute to the indigenous people on the land in which we all stand and recognize this space as the space of stolen and occupied land. I think it's a very important thing to do and recognize where we stand. Uh, the people of this land includes, but is not limited to, the Apaches, the Utes, Cheyennes, Comanches, and Arapahoes. So let's take just a brief moment of silence here to recognize the people of the land, which is now called Colorado, or for whatever land you currently stand on. Thank you for that. Okay, so the theme of this conference is anthropology in shifting times. What does that mean? Well, anthropologist Stanley Diamond once said, anthropology is a study of a man in crisis by a man in crisis. And here we stand, hopefully on the tail end, but not quite out of a very serious pandemic. What does a crisis mean for us? As each one of us watching this virtual conference knows, a crisis can mean very different things for different people. Different cultures will lose different elements. For indigenous people, there's the loss of their elders that's been devastating, and many of us have lost friends and family to the pandemic. But humans are, if nothing else, resilient. And so even as disaster unfolds around us, our species finds new ways to adapt and thrive. So today, as we discuss change as our main theme, I want you all to consider the ways in which you've been strong, courageous, and resilient in the last year. What are the good things that you have done? So consider what traditions and what people, ideas, and experiences have helped you to take stock of what's really important and what's helped you get through this troubling time. We live in a fantastic and interesting time, one where the social relationships are no longer bound by geography. We, right here on this live stream, are from a variety of different places. We've seen time and again in the last year that community has no borders and boundaries, that the opportunity to connect with other people and cultures is not bound by the restrictions of the past. So, as we discuss from our couches, kitchens, desks, or maybe even our beds, I want you to think about the wonder and possibilities of shifting times. We've all been through a lot of stuff, but how can we as a species reflect and work together? And how can we as anthropologists help to engage in that process? What opportunities to make the world thrive are available, and what skills and toolkits of your experience that come from your experience could help you benefit your own communities and the people around you? Shifting times can be difficult and tragic, but shifting times can also be the space that we need to get ourselves on a better path. So may we all make the most of our difficult times. So, some logistical stuff. Each presentation will be 30 minutes. There'll be a 15-minute Q&A section. For presenters, in the chat box, so make sure you have your chat box open. I'll give you a 15-minute warning and a 5-minute warning, and then kind of a 1-minute wrap-up warning, so that you have some semblance of how the time is going. It's okay, of course, if you need to bleed a little into your Q&A time. That's why you have that 15 minutes, is to kind of fill that space and then also answer questions. But I will definitely cut you off at the 45 minutes mark. So make sure you are paying attention. And if you do start to go into questions, I'll give you another 5-minute warning. So note we have two 15-minute breaks and one hour lunch. This evening, we're also going to have an optional social hour after our wonderful poetry workshop hosted by Howard. And the social hour is really there for us to just communicate, reiterate what we've been talking about all day, network with one another. It's just a space for us to kind of be present. And we'll be ending somewhere around 6:30 tonight. Of course, there's lingering anthropologists certainly exist, so we can linger this evening. So, but now I'd like to welcome Peter Van Arsdale. And Peter Van Arsdale is one of the founding members of the High Plains Society for Applied Anthropology. And he's going to be giving a talk today titled Ethnic Cleansing in Ethiopia, the Shifting Role of the Applied Anthropologist. So, and real quick, of course, in terms of courtesy, make sure you're muted if you're not speaking, only unmute in question and answer sessions. You can also ask questions in the chat section, and we will bring that up. If you're watching YouTube, you feel free to post questions in the Q&A section, and we will try to address some of those questions. So thank you, Peter. Go ahead and take us away.
Well, it's great to see you folks. Look, all those nice smiling people like Kenzie there, it makes us feel good that we're a part of this group. I'm joining you from the front porch of my son's home in Liberty, Missouri. So I'm sitting out on a pleasant Missouri day, greeting you from his front porch. It's about 45 degrees, but it's perfect temperature. Sorry I can't join you, as Michael knows, for the entire day, but I'm in transit from my son's home. And so I will have to leave shortly after my presentation, but I wish you a great day, and I'm delighted to be a part of this. And delighted, as Michael kindly said, to be a founding member, along with Howard, of the High Plains Society some 40 years ago. My talk is on ethnic cleansing in Ethiopia, critical problem. And I'll be going for about a half an hour, and then of course time for Q&A, and be sure in that time to hit me with the toughest questions you have, because as we talk about ethnic cleansing and the shifting role of the applied anthropologist, which complements today's theme, I want to share a bit about my shifting role in working on this tough topic, and then of course get your insights as to how you might see shifting roles to help the folks who's been struggling mightily in that northern part of Ethiopia. In early November 2020, fighting broke out in the northern Ethiopian state of Tigray, Tigray. Ethiopian federal forces, aided by border-crossing Eritrean troops, were engaging Tigrayan troops. I have to imagine, and I'll show you this picture, that we're in the northernmost province of Ethiopia. We're sandwiched between Eritrea to the north, which itself borders on the Red Sea, and then the rest of federated Ethiopia to the south. So here we have it. And in this, as you just look briefly on my screen, you have a region that's about 250 miles wide, just to give you some sense of it, 100 and some miles north to south. And you see a region that has approximately 7 million residents out of over 115 million residents in the country of Ethiopia. So this is by no means the most populated, although it's relatively populated given its size. Did you know that Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa and the 12th most populous country in the world? So we are talking about significant population densities and interactions among folks. A different way of saying it, Tigray, the one region we're concerned about here, is about 20,000 square miles. Colorado is about 100,000 square miles. So it's roughly 1/5 the size of Colorado, to give you some scale and scope. So in this area, after these troops engaged in early November of last year, local factions also became involved. This was not a simple one-on-one or black and white or red on blue kind of engagement. This was a multi-factional, complex engagement, which made it even more complicated. Within days in early November, massacres were taking place. Refugees had begun flooding out of the area towards Sudan. Sudan is immediately to the west on this map over here. And communication systems were frozen in part because of logistical problems, but also frozen because of the federal system's intent on isolating, freezing out, and possibly ethnically cleansing some parts of this province of Ethiopia. Then over the ensuing months since November of last year, there have been a number of reports. There have been some difficult to verify, some have been accurate and easy to verify, such as those from Amnesty International, which I think is always very reputable and tries to do its best on the ground reporting. And these reports came through of extrajudicial killings, of rapes, looting, resource destruction, and forced displacement of Tigrayan people. At some points, and we don't have exact statistics because they're, in a war zone, this is a kind of civil war, very difficult to get. But at some point, we think nearly half the people, nearly half the 7 million people in Tigray were impacted by the fighting or the displacement. Unbelievable. And we sadly believe that because of the targeting by Eritrean troops coming in from the north, in partnership with federated Ethiopian troops coming in from the south and sandwiching Tigrayans in between, that ethnic cleansing was purposely engaged in some areas. Truly, since that time, my friends, a civil war has been underway. The proximate reasons, the more immediate reasons given, were that the Tigrayans were holding an unauthorized election and that they had taken over a military base, a federated base that was located in their territory. But Abiy Ahmed, who is the prime minister of Ethiopia, apparently in concert with Isaias Afwerki, who's the president and dictator of Eritrea, collaborated in this attempt. And I think it's far more than just unauthorized election and military-based takeover. All of us who have looked at it see this as a far more historic problem underway. Now, I've been in this area repeatedly for 30 years, on and off, over a 30-year period, so I know Tigray very well. And let me tell you what some of the more distant historic reasons behind this conflagration might be. All the way back to 1974, the Emperor Haile Selassie was overthrown, and in 1974, a military dictatorship was put in place under a regime known as the Derg, D-E-R-G-U-E. And from 74 on, under that oppressive regime, a number of terrors occurred. The so-called Red Terror occurred when people were mass tortured, mass executed, and when many displacements, including forced village displacement and pogroms, occurred. This can be tracked back all the way to the mid-70s. And some of the groups involved today were some of the groups at odds then. In the late 80s, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front started to gain steam and was able, by the early 1990s, to push out the dictatorship and to establish a more legitimate regime. The first time I went to Tigray was shortly after that legitimate regime in the early 90s was put in place. But over the subsequent years, that regime, in my view, became increasingly authoritarian, not dictatorial, but authoritarian. And that caused further tensions with other of the ethnic groups, prime ethnic groups throughout the country. As you folks would know, you're all adept anthropologists. Ethiopia is a very complex country ethnically and tribally. To the south, there are people who identify as tribes, and they call themselves tribesmen, tribeswomen, etc. There are many tribes in the south. People in the central and northern parts tend to refer to themselves as ethnic groups, but that's fine, whatever label you want. The point is there is equally the same kind of tribal tension and inter-ethnic tension. So this has been perpetrating on and on since the 70s, 80s, and 90s even under an improved regime starting in the 90s. Two other quick points historically. In 1998 and 2000, shortly after Eritrea had finally gained its independence from Ethiopia, it had once been a part of Ethiopia, really a massive border war broke out. And in those 2 years, 1998, 1999, that border war, which people said was being fought over land, well, I've been into that landscape. That landscape is desolate. There's virtually nothing there. It was being fought over symbolically and for other reasons. Believe me, it wasn't like they were trying to gain some major resource. It was because there was tension between the governments. Well, that continued. And as you folks also know, into more recent years, when you've heard about those folks struggling as refugees across the Mediterranean, many of them going to places like Italy, or at least trying to get to places like Italy from Africa, many of those folks, and many who died trying to get there, are from Eritrea, some from Ethiopia, but many from Eritrea. So that regime, continuing under the dictator Isaias Afwerki, has been problematic. No surprise then that a couple years back, when the new prime minister, Abiy Ahmed, came to power, and by the way, as an aside, for a while, part of his family was living in Aurora, Colorado. I think that's quite an interesting coincidence, as refugees. When Abiy Ahmed came to power, he attempted to broach a favorable relationship with Eritrea. Okay, sounds good. In fact, it was so favorably received by the international community that Abiy Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, to the amazement of many people and to the, to be frank, dismay of many of us who didn't think he deserved it, in broaching an awkward arrangement with an ongoing dictator. Well, did it improve relations? Yes, but those relations are in part what has triggered now the ethnic cleansing in Tigray because of this odd partnership between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So it's a very historic and problematic situation, as you can tell. Now, on this map, I just keep holding up this little map. It's a good thing to see. In the center areas, right here, the center areas of Tigray are where many of the atrocities have occurred since November of last year. And by the way, do you think it's a coincidence? I'm not sure it is, that the very first occurred on US election day, November 4th. I think there may have been some, I'm inferring, some planning at some level in Ethiopia to engage on our election day to divert attention. Just a speculation on my part, but it may not be a coincidence. In any event, the atrocities in that center part of the map that I've just shown you included things like this. In the town of Oxen, the town purported to have the lost Ark of the Covenant in its chapel. I've been to that chapel twice, and I've talked to the guardian priest who claims to have the lost Ark of the Covenant. It's very exciting. Whether it's there or not, I'm not sure, but the legend is exciting, and you guys have heard about it. Of course, we've all heard of the lost Ark of the Covenant. Near that very chapel, I'm so sad to say, with all those nice people I met there, a massacre occurred in November, just outside the chapel steps, of over 500 people in the town of Oxen. It's a tragic massacre, and it was one of the largest massacres of the war so far. Some of the people killed in that massacre over 2 days were killed by Eritrean troops who'd come in from the north. Some of them were guardian priests, acolytes, and other religious specialists there at the chapel of the purported Ark of the Covenant. You can see the magnificent history and this tragic massacre targeted. Other massacres in that central area of the map that I showed were in the capital city of Mekelle, that's the provincial capital. Were in the town of Adwa, where a factory was destroyed. In the town of Adigrat, I always remember the town of Adigrat. That's where I ate prickly pear fruit for breakfast. What a nice place to eat prickly pear fruit. In Adigrat, bombing and the destruction of their university. In the town of Oxen that I had mentioned a moment ago, also the partial destruction of the new university campus. We all know the value of academics and university education in any country, and in developing countries working so hard as Ethiopia has to improve its university system, and to have two different university campuses partially destroyed by troops. Unbelievable. What about some of the famous monasteries of the Christian Orthodox Ethiopians? They were bombed by air and or from the ground by large-scale artillery. That included the Debre Baramo, the Asimba, and the Salambesa. And finally, just as another tragic example why it touches close to my heart and why we move from, in our shifting roles as anthropologists, from being analysts to being advocates on behalf of those, in this case, who are being massacred. Close to my heart, the clinic, where through Project Cure from Denver, we were able to get $25,000 container shipped in to that clinic. The $25,000 container, my friends, that's what it cost us. But in the container were $400,000 worth of medical supplies. That's what Project Cure does. It's a marvelous program. It's one of those giant shipping containers that you see on boats and trains, the 40-foot containers. Costs $25,000, but inside $400,000 worth of valued medical equipment and supplies. That clinic, sadly, as far as we know, was looted by the troops and the supplies stolen. Oh, it breaks our heart and the heart of those people who contributed the $25,000 to help get the container from Denver, literally, to Ethiopia. So, my friends, these are the tragedies that are occurring in these battles. There are others, but that's enough to share the sadness of what's taking place. About 3 weeks ago, one of our Ethiopian friends returned from the area. She'd luckily been able to get in and get out. Most people have not been able to get in and get out. And here's some of what she reported firsthand to myself and to several of our other Ethiopian and American colleagues who have been working on this issue. She visited some of the industrial farming projects that had been put in place and noticed that they had been partially destroyed by invading troops. She noted the refugees, and estimated over 50,000 from Western Tigray into Sudan, across the national border into the neighboring country of Sudan. Now we estimate maybe 70,000 have crossed from Western Tigray into Eastern Sudan. She noticed how the banks had been closed, no surprise. How the electricity had been out, but purposely put out, so that communications would be negated. The federal government wanted communications negated in this area. Even journalists and reputable journalists from the AP and from Reuters, among others, could not get in. They were not allowed in for over 2 months. People trying to call their loved ones, including Ethiopian Americans living in Denver, trying to call their loved ones in the capital city of Mekelle. no surprise, could not get through with their phone calls because of the suppressed communications. Wasn't she surprised? This lady's name is Menelik. Wasn't Mele surprised and horrified one day while she heard strange sounds overhead? Now, we anthropologists and we members of the High Plains Society, we appreciate, I know we all do, personal narratives that elucidate what we do. It's not just statistics, right? It's the personal narratives and heartfelt experiences. Mele Menelik heard these strange sounds. She didn't know what they were. She looked up. These were drones coming in, military drones, possibly under the auspices of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, vis-a-vis Eritrea. That's her speculation. And those drones were not only surveilling, but were then, no surprise, dropping bombs near her. Wow, unbelievable. Others near her, of course, were killed. Crops being burned, cattle being stolen, and wouldn't you know it, a possible locust plague about to descend on the area. As you've heard, there's been locust plague problems recently in the Horn of Africa. One more crisis. She herself was detained because she is an Ethiopian American with an American passport. She was detained by the Ethiopian Defense Forces for 3 days in a camp. And there, while in the camp, she was, of course, able to clandestinely interview several people and find out more about the atrocities that were taking place. She luckily was able to get through the airport in Addis Ababa, the capital, and again, just 3 weeks ago, fly back to Denver and to give us this report. Well, my friends, we're moving along right on time. I'm going to end it right at 9:30. What are some of the other things that are underway and that we're trying to do? We're trying, several of us are anthropologists, but many are not anthropologists, but a team of diverse people. We're trying to make a difference. So our shifting role in the light of today's theme of today's conference, moving from analyst to advocate, is to contact every congressman and congresswoman we can at the federal level, representing, to start, Colorado. So I'm pleased to be able to share with you the news that, and not just me, but myself and many teammates have reached now all of the Congress people in Colorado. And pardon me for making a small side comment here, because I'm not here to make a political statement. The one person we did not reach out to is Lauren Boebert. We did not feel that Lauren Boebert would have any affiliation or interest in what we're doing, to be blunt about it. Therefore, we did not spend time trying to reach Lauren Boebert. Sorry to say. But all the others, Republican, Democrat, we've reached out to, including Bennett and Hickenlooper, through our team. Sometimes we were not able to talk to them personally, but to their staff members, which is fine. So they're all on board. They've been helping. I'm glad to say, particularly Representative Jason Crow has been very helpful. He happens to represent my district, but whatever. The point is, he's been reaching out and helping at the federal level. And I'm also very pleased to say that President Biden has appointed several key emissaries to the area who are traveling. One senator who is traveling to the area on behalf of President Biden, and the new Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, has specifically been speaking, as some of you have probably seen on television, to leaders about the situation. So that's very important. And obviously that's a high level outreach from people who are trying to make a difference in this crisis. Well, is anything getting better? Is all this effort of advocacy is it doing anything to help our Tigrayan friends? I feel it is now. It's now been several months, of course. The fighting has diminished. The atrocities have diminished. The killings, blessedly, from what we know, have diminished. What are two key things that I particular have been promoting? I'm not the only one, but I've been one of the leaders in promoting. The two key things are obvious. Open communications that include journalists, reputable journalists, and people like us, applied social scientists who do very well in the field in engaging people and getting information through our interviewing and other surveying skills. So open communications, number one. And number two, again, no surprise, humanitarian corridors. The notion of the humanitarian corridor is very well established in humanitarian work. And you need those lines open without troops of any side, pro or con, up or down, left or right, interfering. People struggling, such as the displaced people internally, the refugees who've gone across the border to Sudan, and the many families who've lost their loved ones through these atrocious killings, need humanitarian relief. There are agencies willing to do it. The key is open corridors that are not disrupted by troops from any side or by militia from any side. Have we made some effort, some headway in this regard? A bit, but not near as much as we might. And the final thing I'll say before opening to questions, because I think we're right on time, is that it's also good to write. You know, we anthropologists are pretty good at writing things. And so I worked with one columnist, a friend of mine. He did the main writing. I was just a contributor for an op-ed piece. I've told my students over the many years before I retired from University of Denver, writing is always important, and writing op-eds for key newspapers where people can read it and get the latest in a short span of time is also critical. So great thanks to my friend Ved Nanda, a professor at the University of Denver and a columnist for the Denver Post, for his writing about this problem on our behalf. Well, my friends, there you go. That's my presentation. And be open to any and all, and feel free to hit me with the toughest questions. I don't have all the answers, but feel free to hit me with the toughest questions you have or comments. Thank you.
You don't have all the answers, Peter?
I do not. I do not.
Thank you so much, Peter. All right, we'll open up for questions. What is everyone's questions?
I'd like to hear from Kenzie. Kenzie has been such an enthusiastic, all of you have, such an enthusiastic listener with a good smile and a concern for these fellow humans. Kenzie, I'd like to hear your question first or comment.
I have some written down. So this is the kind of thing that I do while y'all do
Excellent. Marvelous.
This is why I say I always get so much out of these presentations. And thank you so much. This was, I got so much out of this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So a couple questions I have actually. One which maybe, so I'll save my hard one maybe for the second one. So the first one I have is about, you mentioned kind of like the way that you were talking about it, like we know that there's, or we like the, it's like the alleged ethnic cleansing that's happening, right?
Yeah,
and how to take that from alleged to acknowledged, because it is acknowledged by many, but to kind of have that documentation. So one of the things I thought about was in forensic anthropology and in archaeology, the way that they're able to tell mass graves by the shape that the backhoe makes in the earth with the stratigraphy. So they're able to see where that earth was compressed and that a backhoe was used, say, in a remote village for a mass grave. And so the presence of the backhoe implicates the government in that case. I can't tell you exactly where this was. It was, and I can't even tell you which project this was because it's been about 10 years. But but that backhoe indicating that there had to be some sort of governmental cooperation in order to get that piece of equipment there. So I wondered, like, what are the evidences that can be used as far as that, or similar things as far as taking, you know, having that backup of that evidence for when there is that denial.
Marvelous, marvelous question, very thoughtful. There's a few evidences coming in that are, again, we have to be cautious, Kenzie, and I like the way you were cautious in presenting that. We don't ever accuse anybody until we have data, until it's evidentiary. But the ones coming in are now some films of the corpses, sadly, of the people, such as in the town of Oxen. We now have films of the people literally lying on the ground with their grieving loved ones nearby. And you can tell that it's that town because we know what the town looks like. It's not anything artificial. That's the real film, sadly. And we have that. And we do now also have, I understand, I have not seen it directly, some evidence of mass graves that have been dug, maybe not by backhoes, or might have been, I'm not sure how they were dug, but I've been told there is some evidence now, sadly, of mass graves in that area and in other areas of Tigray province. So forensically, you're absolutely right. We have to follow up on that, be cautious about it, not overstate it or understate it. You notice I've been very cautious not to give too many statistics. Well, we don't know exactly the statistics. How many exactly were killed or displaced? Thousands, I'm sure. So thank you. That first question was excellent. What's your second question?
Well, on that note too, you mentioned the difficulty of actually getting into this area. And so it's a little bit like archaeology in that sense, in that we still have things coming to light because we don't have the actual materials, like access to materials all the time that tell us these things. So we get this imperfect picture too. So having the data helps those op-eds and the public work that we do reach the people that it needs to, and unfortunately convince the people that it needs to. Anyway, you're just making me think of a lot of things. But my second question was, what can your observations in the work that you've done there culturally, what can your observations tell us about the sort of nature or approach of, for instance, you mentioned American government interventions, things like this. What should be the approach going into this region based on these cultural aspects that are unique to that region as far as
that's terrific. Yeah, I think the American government isn't perfect, but it can often help in these situations. And somebody like Anthony Blinken has a lot of clout. People will listen to Anthony Blinken. Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister, will listen to Anthony Blinken. So at that level, it can help, we hope. But what about us? What can we do going into that region to build on your second excellent question, Kenzie? We can, no surprise, work with the NGOs. We anthropologists are pretty darn good at working with NGOs. So many of us work for NGOs. I've worked for them myself, and I've worked with them many times in my career. So no surprise. There are reputable NGOs, such as the Tigray Development Association, TDA, such as the Relief Society of Tigray, REST, which are there, well established, and folks like us, when it's safe, we have to look for our own safety, of course, can go back in and work through those channels and do something, help some people. We can't help everybody, but help some people. Yep. Terrific questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Peter, may I ask a couple questions and comment?
Please, Howard.
This is Howard. I want to start where you exactly ended. I don't have all the answers. The way applied anthropologists work in general, and certainly you do, is facilitate an atmosphere of advocacy, of storytelling, of personal narratives, of creating a space in which answers can emerge. Unlike a lot of American consultants who invade corporations in all black suits with the answers, you work with people and the creative part emerges. You don't have to have the answers. One of the great virtues of applied anthropology is working together with people in a horizontal relationship most of the time, rather than vertical, top-down, autocratic. And everybody is an expert of one kind or another. And so, in a way, you're not only advocating people, you're advocating people's to share perspectives, to listen and hear other people's perspectives rather than only state their own. So I love the idea where you ended, because it's a wonderful summary of everything you said, that rather than come in like all experts or most experts with the answer, you create a process in which people can problem solve together. You may have some answers. You all try on different ideas in a safe enough atmosphere in which nobody gets punished for an idea. And I think that that's, I've known you and heard you talk about all sorts of projects and all sorts of groups you've worked with, all the way back to elderly Vietnamese people in Colorado.
Yes.
And part of the way you make a difference is by listening, by giving people voice. Part of advocacy is not so much what you do, but helping other people to have a voice in which they can do something, rather than enforced silence, which often happens in the presence of experts. After all, an expert is supposed to be the one to speak and everybody else listens. But that's not the way applied anthropological experts work. Anyway,
I'm with you, Howard.
Thank you for making me think.
Thank you, Howard, for those wonderful comments and your kind compliments. I absolutely, and I notice what's coming on the chat bar. I'm reading the various chats that our friends are sending, all of which I greatly appreciate on behalf of my good friend Howard and myself. Creating a space is what we can be very good at. It's not always easy, as Howard alluded to, but creating a space where different voices can reign, not the expert's voice. The expert needs to be the good facilitator to help create the space for other voices, particularly the voices of the marginalized, the voices of the oppressed, the voices of people who haven't had a chance to become famous or publish articles. I was just on a call yesterday with some folks, including the head of the Princeton Anthropology Department, a very nice lady named Carolyn Rouse. Her sister, by the way, Cecilia Rouse, is the chair of Joe Biden's Council of Economic Advisors. Carolyn Rouse was talking very pleasantly about publications and the value of publications in prestigious journals. Okay, I'm with you. It's great to publish in prestigious journals. In that conversation, I had the opportunity to share in different words just what Howard and I are talking about now in terms of making a difference in other than publishing in prestigious journals. Yeah. We have our own high page journal, which we're very proud of. peer-reviewed, excellent papers. It's not the world's most famous journal, but it's a very reputable and good journal. And we publish there, and we are glad to publish there. But I made the obvious point to Carolyn Rouse. What about all the other projects that are out there that don't have to do with publication, but where you make a difference in people's lives through facilitating a space, to paraphrase Howard? So believe me, this has been on my mind this week, and I really appreciate Kenzie's questions and Howard's. I know I have about 2 minutes left. I'm trying to keep right on time, Mr. Michael. How about
can I interject something really fast? I've been working with Peter with the Axiom Sister Cities Committee for over 30. Hi, Peter. For over 30 years, and he has done just now an extraordinary and provided us with an extraordinary encapsulation of an incredibly complicated, incredibly important, and of course, obviously tragic human situation. But it's a very personal matter for Peter. He's known many of these people that he's talking about on a very personal level for a very long time, and their families. And those families, many of them are very much integrated, a very integral part of the Denver metropolitan larger community, because the Axiom city that he was speaking about, where the Ark of the Covenant is housed, is a sister city of Denver. And we've had a number of interactions, both almost on a daily basis, with people in Axiom from Denver over many years, and many personal face-to-face involvement or communications. And Peter's been an integral, vital part of that. And he's given us this powerful applied anthropological perspective and provided us all kinds of tools about how to deal with it and how important it is to deal with it. But it also, I want everyone to know how deeply personal it is to him and meaningful to him and to many of us who've been involved in with those people over many years.
Dave, you're more than kind. It's wonderful to see you today, as it always is. I wish I could see you more often, but I will in the near future after COVID.
Thanks, Peter.
I think we have time for one more question. Sure.